Hello, BookTube. One of my bitterly early morning appointments last week got canceled because of snow. Doesn't happen that often anymore in Boston. I remember just a few years ago it happened every week. But it had to be rescheduled. And it was rescheduled, and so I had the rare occasion to foray out on the weekend. It was rescheduled for bitterly early this morning. In fact, I was winding up that appointment when I saw, thanks to the Wi-Fi of my host, that Jason Harrigan of Jason Has Books had just posted a Saturday ramble about getting books in the mail, about shopping at a great Irish bookstore and getting them to mail him books. Made me think, my heart go out to him, actually, a dedicated book hunter such as himself, who's brought to ordering books online, even though it's a virtuous thing and sounds like a great shop. He's brought to do that by the strict lockdown that is imposed on Ireland. You know, it doesn't take but a second to think, well, what would that be like if it were true here? It should be true here. It should absolutely be true here, but it's not. If it were true here that stores couldn't be open and that I couldn't go to them, the Brattle bookshop here in Boston doesn't really have the means to have me shop at random for serendipitous discoveries. I would have to pick things from them. One way or another, I saw that, and that, of course, put me in mind for when my appointment was over to walk on over to the Brattle bookshop and do some shopping. And I did that. And I confess, my shopping was a little bit exorbitant today. There will be no Steve Pyramid at the end. It could not happen in a million years. It was a little bit exorbitant, not only because a couple of my Brattle trips last week were postponed because it snowed or rained a couple of days last week, but also out of the knowledge that it is going to snow tomorrow. Now, you wouldn't think that would cause me to do extra shopping since the Brattle isn't typically open on a Sunday anyway. Nevertheless, that's how these things work. I felt extra compelled to go and get books. So I went and indulged myself. And I want to show you what I got. It's a pile of books. It's a pile of books. I'm not sure all of them will be keepers, but that's all right, because none of them are all that expensive. And the first three are mass market murder mysteries, because I am always in the mood for mass market paperback murder mysteries, and especially with March Mystery Madness right on the horizon. You may, if you watch a lot of BookTube, you may have seen all the announcement videos, all the great channels that are involved this year in March Mystery Madness, where all throughout the month of March, you are encouraged to read murder mysteries and talk about them. And if I can figure out, if I can get comfortable on the Discord server, then you'll always be able to find me there, talk to me there about your murder mysteries or anything else. But, I'm always in the mood for murder mysteries anyway, but it was extra so this time around. And I got 3 mass market paperbacks. The first one is by Simon Troy, called Swift to Its Close, with death as one of the seats there in the audience. A murderous undertone infects the Sal's Church Music Festival in rural England. The eminent composer Doyle Wantage and his wife Grace, although now divorced, are reluctantly tied together through their work on the festival. Grace has taken up as liaison with a local notable who gleefully flaunts his infidelity to his own wife, and in the meantime, Wantage has engaged in a very attractive young housekeeper. The lethal emotional tangle explodes on the night of the festival's opening concert, and it's up to Inspector Smith to pick up the pieces. Sounds a little bit by the numbers, but it's fine by me. I'll still try it. It's the work of no time at all to read. Then this next one is by Sally Wright. I don't think I've read these first 2 authors at all. This is called Publish and Parish, and it is a Ben Reese murder mystery. A college professor dead under mysterious circumstances, a secretary who hates the victim with lethal ferocity, a vengeful former student, to university archivist Ben Reese. So Ben Reese is a classic amateur detective. He's a university archivist. He's not a licensed detective, and he is not a police officer. To university archivist Ben Reese, the sudden death of his old friend and colleague Richard West, chair of the English department, looks like murder. But in a small, button-down private college, can it ever be proved? Not until an attack on his own life tells Ben all he needs and fears to know about a brilliant sociopathic killer. And the Washington Post, on the blurb on the back, compares it to Dorothy Sayers and Nagayo Marsh, which are some mighty big shoes to fill. So I don't know if that's going to happen. But this is... Sorry, it's got a price tag on the back that's bothering me. This is another example of sort of a sub-theme in the murder mysteries that I've been finding lately, where there's a connection with either writing or academia or both. That fascinates me. So Publish and Parish, I will give a try. Then this third one is by Julian Simmons. I have read Julian Simmons before, but I haven't read this one. This is called Bland Beginning. Look at this cover. Look at that cover. That is just awesome. Are you telling me that somebody had their cat taxidermied in the act of howling? I don't know. I don't know that I want to know either. But I had to hoot at this plot summary. It all began when Tony Sheldon found himself paying 100 guineas for a book, a rare collection of his grandfather's poems. It was supposed to be a present for his fiancée, but it led him into a tangle of forgery claims, fantastic offers for the book, and finally robbery, violence, and murder. Naturally, I hooted with laughter because I had been partially propelled onto this Brattle trip by watching Jason Harrigan, who is an antique book dealer, a book collector, or that sort of thing, in addition to everything else that he does. He also does that. And this is a book that starts off with someone directly in that world. Meeting with mayhem naturally made me think, what would happen? Can you imagine what would happen if Jason was found dead in the library where he films his videos? Can you imagine it? Interpol agents knocking on Mark Richardson's door up in Vermont. Oh, yeah, can I help you? Jason Harrigan was found dead. Well, how does that affect me? I'm all the way over in Vermont. I'm an upstanding citizen. I'm a library director. Oh, yes, but our surveillance camera shows that you were at his house on the day of the murder. Oh, maybe I was. And that you had a van double parked out back. Any explanation for that? Yeah, I have an explanation for it. I couldn't park on the sidewalk because Todd Oval was already there. So you'd have a ready-made list of suspects. If Jason Harrigan meets this grisly end, all the members of the OGBG would immediately convene to yoink his book collection. But one way or another, I'm going to look forward to all three of these. I may have the self-control to wait on them until March. I may have the self-control to do that. We'll see. This next one is a replacement volume for a volume on this bookcase about books and authors and publishing. But oddly enough, it's a replacement volume in the opposite direction from what's usual. Ordinarily, I replace paperbacks with hardcovers. But in this case, I don't treasure the volume enough to do that, so I'm going to replace the hardcover with a paperback. This is Now Barabbas by William Ivanovich, the paperback has a picture of him on the cover. There he is with the thing that killed him. Well, that's great. You know, the next biography that we have of Dorothy Sayers, or how about the next biography that we have of Virginia Woolf? Should we have a nice artistic title with the lettering and the calligraphy and whatnot, and then maybe a picture of the coroner's chalk outline, something like that? Why anybody thinks this is a good idea, I have no conception whatsoever. Probably it's the only publicity photograph that he sat for. He didn't like that kind of thing, but one way or another, there he is with the thing that killed him. But he'd be famous to some of you because the publishing house, where he rose through the ranks, he started beating the pavement, selling books for nothing, for no money, when it was Harcourt Brace, and rose so far, so fast, and was kind of sort of beloved through it all. He wasn't the easiest man in the world to love, but kind of sort of so beloved through it all that at the end, Harcourt Brace renamed itself Harcourt Brace Ivanovich. And this is not a memoir of his. I wish that it were. I think a memoir, just an explicit memoir, might have been more interesting, and I can't for the life of me remember if he actually wrote one. This is more his look at the publishing world, and it's fascinating. Don't get me wrong. It's fascinating for all that. But it's a little bit on the wooden side. So I have the hardcover here, and I don't revisit it as often as I revisit so many of the other books on this shelf, so I will replace the hardcover. See, the books are falling already but there are so many of them. And actually I'm just going to put these on the floor because there's no way I can do a Steve pile. There's too many of them. I'm just going to replace this with the paperback. Somebody went to the bother of putting in his New York Times obituary in here, so that's great. Whoever that person is, they didn't annotate anything else, which is wonderful. This next book also destined for this bookcase. This is So Many Books, So Little Time. I'm just noticing it's a little dirty, but I can clean it up. All dirt comes off. By Sarah Nelson, who was for years and years a grand poobah at Publishers Weekly and who's been involved in all aspects of the publishing and reviewing world just forever, and is an incredibly ardent fan of the bookish world, an incredibly energetic booster of books and reading and reviews. What I wouldn't give for a big collection of her book reviews. That would be so much fun to have, but Alas, no. This is the next best thing. This is her sort of reading memoir, the type that I always hope that everybody writes. I may write one myself, or in many volumes. And I read this when it first came out. When was that? The early 2000s? 2003, yeah. I read this when it first came out, but I haven't read it since, and I love these sorts of things. So I read it, and I doubt very much. I'm pretty sure that it will come in here. Then we have a classic of a kind. A classic of a kind. I was very happy to see this volume when it first came out. This came out in the 90s, I believe. No, 2000. This came out in 2000 from Johns Hopkins University Press. This is Jerusalem Delivered by Torquato Tasso. A incredibly influential epic in verse. See, it's got the verse all throughout there. It was incredibly influential. It's not all that good. It's not all that good. It's part of kind of a trilogy of like works. There's Jerusalem Delivered, there's Orlando Innamorato, and there's Orlando Furioso, and it's awful tough for the first two to chin up to the bar when they're competing with Ariosto, because Orlando Furioso, despite the fact that I'm never going to be able to convince anyone of this, is incredibly good. As a reading experience, it's incredibly good. It doesn't read like what you would think, an incredibly long epic from the House of Este in the Italian Renaissance. You'd think, oh, okay, historically interesting, but I would never want to read it. And that with Ariosto, that is absolutely not true. All you have to do is give it a couple of cantos, and you'll see for yourself. But Jerusalem Delivered is it's a little bit closer to the truth of that. The translator and editor here is Anthony Esselin, and he does a great job. And also, this is beautiful. It's just a beautiful volume. I remember having this forever and ever, and then I got rid of it, I think, in a move. I don't think I actually got rid of it to the Brattle or anywhere else. I think it just disappeared in a move, as books do, except for this last move. This last move of mine, nothing disappeared. Nothing. In fact, things came to light. But this is too important not to have a volume, and this is by far the best English. I think there's only one other modern English translation. It was a little paperback that I had that fell apart, and it was noticeably wooden. This is certainly a much better try at conveying to an English reading audience anything of what Tasso's original readers would have been seeing, any of the appeal that they would have seen in this original poem. And the critical apparatus is fantastic. So I saw it for dirt cheap and grabbed it. Then we have another thing that is coming onto this shelf, and it will be a companion to, can I grab it? Can I grab it right away? Yes, it will be a companion to this. This is Passions of the Mind, a collection of book essays by A.S. Byatt that are, the publisher characterizes them in the book as considered essays. They were actually, the drill. If you watch this channel, they were deadline work, same as I do, only much, much better. And this is on Histories and Stories, selected essays by A.S. Byatt. And this is the same thing. It's a collection of her meditations on authors and critical theories of one kind or another. And as far as I know, I haven't actually checked, but as far as I know, there is no overlap between these two. I'm hoping that there isn't. I'm hoping that this thing doesn't just slot very easily into this work. I'm hoping that there's all sorts of original stuff in here, which will make that's great, because I love Passions of the Mind. I think those essays are just fantastic. I'm a big fan of this author, just in general, her novels and her nonfiction. And it's not long. It won't take long to do. I'm going to enjoy it quite a bit, even when she writes about authors I don't like. She is still fascinating. And what else we got here? Oh, yes, another one. This is a gem from 1947. So the author, or the editor, did not live to see it, and certainly did not live to see its enormously freakish afterlife as a used book for $1 at the Brattle bookshop in Boston. This is the Sherwood Anderson Reader. Isn't that lovely? That is just lovely. Edited by Paul Rosenfeld, who was a good friend of Sherwood Anderson, and who is lost. He is largely lost to history. I was so happy to find this volume. Paul wrote a lot. He wrote an enormous amount. He wrote an enormous amount of stuff, of music reviews, for instance, what I wouldn't give for a huge volume, annotated volume of his music reviews. They were often brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Wrote a ton of book reviews. I think those were collected, but the collection was vigorously overseen by him, and that, in this case, sometimes that's good, but in this case, that ruined somebody else should have done that. And I'm hoping that someday somebody will, although it seems unlikely. If Sherwood Anderson is in danger of being forgotten by the general reading public, and he certainly is, outside of school, who reads Sherwood Anderson, even though he's great, who reads him? If he's in danger of being forgotten, then Paul Rosenfeld is certainly in danger of is already forgotten. But this is, he was a friend of Sherwood Anderson. He was in a much better position to do this kind of a volume than Anderson's rather vigilant literary executrix. The less said about, the better. And Rosenfeld here puts together an amazing volume. It's an amazing volume of bits and pieces, short stories and nonfiction things that Anderson wrote that are designed thematically and grouped roughly chronologically to give you an idea of who this writer was. And Rosenfeld also includes snippets from the novels, from some of the novels and from some of the short stories. And takes as his justification for doing that Anderson himself often excerpted those same things. So he clearly had no problem with them being read outside of their setting. I had this volume once upon a time, a long, long time ago. This is not mine. I checked. It does not have my mark. But I don't have any Sherwood Anderson. When I got this volume, Sherwood Anderson was in foul repute with me. And Paul Rosenfeld was a voice in the wilderness saying, this is an obviously great author. I'm not even going to make a case for whether or not he's great. I will make a case for whether or not you should read him. And I felt guilty. I read the great introduction to this volume, and I read some of the pieces in it, and felt guilty about not liking Sherwood Anderson more than I do. And I let it go at that, and never really worked on it. I don't have any Sherwood Anderson standing on its own. Don't have Winesburg, Ohio, or anything like that. And I don't have any Paul Rosenfeld, even though I would love I think there was one critical collection that he did. He was urged to do more, including by his friend Edmund Wilson, who urged him, let's have all of this in print. Let's have all of you in print. I'm sure that we could find a publisher who would run all kinds of things. He was a harsh taskmaster of his own written word, unjustly, because it's all wonderful. I can hope, with the serendipity of the Brattle, it's serendipitous enough that I would find this volume after decades. I haven't had mine in decades, and it was a long way from here. That I should find this volume again, just at random, in a used bookstore in Boston, is serendipitous enough. If the serendipity of the Brattle really comes through, then whoever got this for them may have given them Paul Rosenfeld's books. A novel, collection of critical work. They may turn up. I don't know if they would. Maybe they would end up on the third floor where the Brattle keeps its collectible stuff, although I can't imagine anybody would even know this name or pay for it. But this is going to give me a great opportunity to revisit Sherwood Anderson, just like it did all those decades ago. It's going to give me a great opportunity to revisit this author, and maybe, after all this time, Rosenfeld's selections will kindle even greater affection. Who knows? Sorry, Lord Ganesh. It's a bit of a mess here, but in my own defense, no amount of ergonomics could have fixed this because there are so many books here. This is just an enormous pile of books. There's nothing that would have worked here. So I'm just going to pile these on the floor, which may occasionally mean that I'm dipping out of camera range. Lord Ganesha can forgive me. You can forgive me. Then these next two share a theme in common. See if you could spot it. These are both biographies. This first one is by Frederick Bowes. This is his life of Christopher Marlowe. And this is from around the same time. Yeah, this is from around the same time. Yeah, the 1940s. 1940 itself. This is from 1940. It is, I think, still widely regarded as the definitive scholarly biography of Marlowe, which goes through all that we know of his life, which is not all that much, which goes through all that we know of his plays, which is considerably more, and on which Bowes is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. He did a critical volume of the collected plays of Thomas Kidd that is amazing, just incredible as a work of scholarship. If I liked Kidd even a little bit more than I do, I would own it, because the Brattle has a copy. And I've seen once or twice, you see copies, but not often. So when I saw this without a dust jacket, I grabbed it. And I am going to have a joyful time making a dust jacket for this book. I'm going to make a front cover. I'm going to make a spine. And I'm going to make a back cover. And it's going to be a joy to do. I may even go so far as to make the back cover a collection of snippets of blurbs, if I can find enough of them. I know this was reviewed in Scholarly Press. Wouldn't that be fun? If I created a page of blurbs, the like of which no one has ever done. No one has ever done that. And no one ever did that for this book, and it's long gone. It's long out of print. It's never going to come back. But I haven't read this in forever. I have long dreamed about doing some sort of fictional treatment of Christopher Marlowe. I've read a huge number of them. And although a lot of them satisfy me, a lot of them do, Ended from the Sun, Dead Man in Deptford, and a whole bunch of others, I still think there's a book out there that is as bombastic, as big, as confident, and as subversive as Marlowe's own plays. I don't think I've read that book about Marlowe, that novel about Marlowe. I've often been tempted to do it. And so I had this forever and ever. I had it anyway because I love this sort of thing. I love big, magisterial, scholarly biographies of historical characters. Like, I don't know, Dermot McCullough's big book on Thomas Cromwell, which was kicked to the curb at middle of the book march just today. DNF'd. Hashtag don't DNF Dermot. But anyway, I love scholarly biographies like this. Absolutely love them. I'm glad to have this again, especially since it was dirt cheap and since I will have the joy of making a dust jacket for it, which is a lot of fun. The reason it's not going to reappear is because a slew of later Marlowe biographies have appeared, including this one, Park Honan, his biography of Christopher Marlowe, which I had once upon a time in a very stiff and poorly made trade paperback. Found the hardcover today. Obviously, these came from the same person. And I'm always up for more than one Marlowe biography, although, in a way, aside from how great Park Honan is to read, how interesting he is to read, his observations about the time and his conjectures about the man, in a way, aside from that, the only book you need is Beau's book on Marlowe. It's the one that covers everything and does it so definitively that you don't need any later studies. But I'll take them. This is quasi-fictional, as all biographical reconstructions of Marlowe must be. They must be quasi-fictional, hence the subtitle Poet and Spy. We don't know more than a tiny snippet to justify a subtitle like that. And I believe that part of the reason why all of these later biographies feel so free with their suppositioning and their extrapolating from scraps and tidbits is right there on the cover of this book. That is the portrait of Corpus Christi, Texas, that was unearthed. It was rediscovered after Beau's book, long after, in 1953, I think, or 52, something like that. This painting was rediscovered at Corpus Christi, and Marlowe scholars jumped on it right away and said, oh, that's Christopher Marlowe, with what I consider to be almost no justification. Dates line up, roughly, but they line up with a whole bunch of people, not just with Marlowe. They line up with a whole bunch of young men. And I believe this image has firmly taken root in the minds of literally everyone, that this is Christopher Marlowe, that is what the playwright looks like. And on the one hand, I don't know that that's true. On the other hand, I can't help but wonder, for instance, how many biographies, popular poet and spy biographies, there would be of Thomas Kidd if we had a portrait of him that looked like this. Because that's not just a portrait, it's a pretty portrait. It's a pretty young man. It's a handsome young dandy. Thomas Kidd was not a handsome young dandy. He was ugly. He looked like a drowned rat. But when he was 17, probably he had, young British boys tend to have a window of about 3 weeks when they're 17, where they are the most beautiful creatures in the world. Then their British teeth erupt, their British skins erupt, their British hair beats a retreat to the nether regions, and suddenly they start looking like all the rest of the world pictures British men to look. They start looking a lot more like Shakespeare than like that. That's just the way of it. Any of you who've watched young British booktubers will know that, or British YouTubers. That crop of British YouTubers that we all fell in love with 15 years ago. Oh, there's not one of them now that doesn't look like a serial killer. Not that we don't love the most literary people in the world, but nevertheless, I can't help but wonder how much impetus for books about Marlowe came from the fact that you've got something to put on the cover. And would that be true of Thomas Kidd or anybody else if you had a similar picture? One way or another, Honan is delightful to read. So I mean, a lot of this book is supposition. A lot of it is just him riffing about Marlowe's time. But that's okay with me. Absolutely okay with me, especially since I have the #1 scholarly biography right next to it. I got them at the same time, so it counterbalances. Then this next one is 3 books, and I couldn't believe my luck. Just couldn't believe my luck. I mentioned the other day, TomLABooks, a booktuber. I'll try and remember to leave a link to his channel down below. I don't know if I did that last time. It's no good for me to sing the praises of these newcomers on BookTube if I don't leave you a link to find them. But nevertheless, he's a new booktuber. He's fantastic. And he, in addition to all the other stuff that he does on his channel, he's also proposing to do a canto by canto walkthrough of Dante's Divine Comedy. And there was a Dante reader tag saturated in his love of the Divine Comedy that is still going around. If you're a booktuber, feel free to do it. The prompts are really good, and you don't need to know chapter and verse on Dante to do the prompts. The prompts are very carefully constructed so that is true. And in the course of my doing that tag, I mentioned various ideal editions of Dante in English. And a lot of you are surprised. I leave my email on every video. You are free to email me about anything. Quite a few people emailed me surprised that I did not say that Longfellow's translation was my favorite, since it's well known that I went to public school with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And I love his translation of the Divine Comedy, but it's, you know, I don't mean to echo the nefarious quote about Alexander Pope, but surely you can't call it Dante. It's not. I'm not 100% sure that Dante would have liked what Longfellow did to his poem poetically. But I was thinking, yeah, an ideal Divine Comedy would be my favorite English language translation, which is Alan Mandelbaum, and which comes with illustrations that are lovely, but they aren't as lovely as Gustave Doré's illustrations. So what? And the notations in the Mandelbaum aren't as good, I think, as the notations in Dorothy Sayers' translation of the Divine Comedy. So my ideal version of the Divine Comedy would be the Mandelbaum translation, the Sayers notes, Gustave Doré's illustrations, and maybe alternate a few pages with facing pages of Longfellow's translation just because of how beautiful it is. It would be a horrible mishmash of a thing. You'd think it would be possible to create such an ideal version in the 21st century, but no. But anyway, when I was mentioning that, I mentioned that I have the trade paperbacks of the Mandelbaum translation of the 3 volumes. And I mentioned that there's an Everyman's Library that has the whole thing, but I don't think it has the illustrations. Book of the Month Club edition came out with a gorgeous edition of the Mandelbaum Dante. I had them in mass market paperbacks from Bantam, I think, for forever and ever. I used to wear through those paperbacks, just go in and buy them again. Those aren't made anymore, but I had them in that format forever and ever. And then I found at the Brattle the Book of the Month Club, slightly oversized trade paperbacks of those, and thought, okay, well, these are going to be a lot more durable than the little mass market paperbacks. And they were, but not by much. They weren't a lot more durable. They were a little more durable. And I was thinking, okay, well, you're out of luck because you really like this format. But the Library of America hardcover, or the Book of the Month Club hardcover of the Mandelbaum Divine Comedy, those hardcovers are oversized. And the reason that I had that fresh in my mind, that I was right about that, is because there is a 3-volume set of those hardcovers at the Brattle. And when I was there, I saw them at the Brattle, and I thought, yeah, that's great, but they're too big. They're too big to be comfortably read. I remember looking at them, thinking how I wish Book of the Month Club had done those 3 volumes in hardcover with the Barry Moser illustrations and the Alan Mandelbaum translation and notes in exactly that format, only in hardcover in a normal size. And when I was thinking that, I was thinking, well, they didn't. So, it would be nice, but you're going to have to compromise. But it turns out they did. They did make these things in normal-sized hardcovers. Do I have a normal-sized hardcover? Yeah, here's Kit Marlowe. we have this and these. See, those are the same size. What I thought the hardcover Book of the Month Club editions I thought were not this size. So here we have Paradiso. There's Inferno. There's Purgatorio. Look at that, huh? Look at that. This was the paperback cover for Inferno. There's Dante and his guide. These are just fantastic, and here they are in pristine hardcovers. I couldn't believe my luck. So I now have my favorite English language translation of the Divine Comedy in my favorite version that exists. So once again, as with the Jovanovic book, I will just take the paperbacks and get rid of them and put the hardcovers in their place as I slowly pinpoint in this little book room the perfect editions of the things that I most want. That's fantastic. I have the paperbacks of the Dorothy Sayers translation in Penguin. Ideally, I would like Penguin to do a Penguin Deluxe edition with a new introduction appreciating Dorothy Sayers for something other than her murder mystery novels and reprinting those her great work on the Divine Comedy. Ideally, I would like that in one volume. I don't think I'm ever going to get that. I don't think that's ever been done. And ideally, I would like a Penguin or somebody else to bring out a nice looking paperback of the Longfellow, Dante, which I believe is the Barnes & Noble Leatherbound Classic. I'm pretty sure that the Barnes & Noble Leatherbound Classic of the Divine Comedy is Longfellow with the Dore illustrations. I don't know that I have that, but I'm pretty sure that's true. I think maybe the reason why I don't have it, if I don't have it, is because I never encountered it in a store when it wasn't wrapped, and you don't want to buy one of those things. They aren't cheap. They're $25. And you don't want to buy one of those things and then turn out to be the wrong thing. I should check on that and see. There's no harm in having more than one, Dante. But now I have this. That is fantastic. Then this next one is oversized. It is a big, heavy hardcover. It's not a keeper, I don't think. But not in the reason you would think. You would think the reason it wouldn't be a keeper is because I would read it, enjoy it, and then realize that I can just sell it back to the Brattle or give it back to the Brattle for credit. But instead, in this particular volume's case, it isn't a keeper because I know that I'm going to mail it out to somebody. I always do. I've had dozens of copies of this thing in paperback and hardcover. I've given them all away because they're so good. They're just so good. This is Make Way for Lucia. This is E.F. Benson's Map and Lucia novels that are just so wonderful. This is a big hardcover omnibus. These are just so great. This one has, let me see here. It has an introduction by Nancy Mitford, and it has a foreword by Anne Parish, who writes, "It is better not to think of the passengers in this omnibus when I am in public by myself." It's absolutely true, and for the reason that she says. Because I once remembered Georgie Pilson on Fifth Avenue. A strange gentleman bowed to me coldly. Because I once remembered the Padre on Third Avenue, a butcher's boy beamed and shouted, "Atta baby." For I cannot think of Map and Lucia books without breaking into smiles. And that's what happens. Same thing with this or with Lord Emsworth. You start to smile just remembering them, even when you're around strangers. Although my copies are warped from falling into brooks and baths, and their pages dotted with semi-transparencies from buttery crumbs that have fallen on them at tea times, I cannot exhaust their freshness. And that is true, and Nancy Mitford in her introduction writes the same thing. Thank God we have a volume after so many years when these things in wartime were not available. This is the ultimate Tempest in a Teapot novels. They are tense power struggles being enacted in a small town between two dominant world dictators in the form of Map and Lucia. I love these books. I've had them in mass market paperbacks that fall apart. I've had this omnibus in a trade paperback that tends to fall apart. A couple of you over the years have requested those trade paperbacks, and a couple of you have said, if you're going to send me that, and I really appreciate it, would you maybe reinforce it first so that it has a little bit longer life to it? And I always tell people, I reinforce things in a very unscientific way. It's almost unsightly. It's just designed to give a few more years to the book. Are you sure you want me to do that? And I've had people say, yeah, please do that. And now I have another one, but it won't last. It won't last. It won't be mine. There's no way. It'll end up going somewhere else. Then we have a big biography, big in the sense of size rather than the sense of page count. This is by Donald Redford, who was a working Egyptologist, worked in a couple of major important digs. And this is his book, Akhenaten, the Heretic King. And there he is in his famous profile, the famous artwork that he had done of himself that looked like no other pharaonic artwork ever before him or since, certainly no other in the 18th dynasty. He is one of the most famous Egyptian pharaohs of them all, probably, as the pub sheet for this book used to say, probably second only to King Tut. Mainly because of the echoes that have rebounded down the ages that he tried to change the official religion of the empire into something resembling a monotheism. And it was, just started his own sacred city for it, was reviled afterwards for it. He wasn't born Akhenaten. He for the first few years of his reign, he was Amenhotep IV, the successor to Amenhotep III, who was a great pharaoh, far greater than Akhenaten, and who's not remembered because he never tried to change the official religion of the empire. Akhenaten III has a really good biography that I'm hoping whoever got rid of this at the Brattle had that as well, so that it will pop up. But Redford writes something at the beginning of this book that I wanted to read to you because it's so good. Where is it here? It's right at the front, and it is a perfect encapsulation of what you should remember when you're reading history, so that you remember that history is not boring. It's a perfect encapsulation of that. Yet the 15th century BC in which we find ourselves is remarkably civilized. He's talking about the fact that this is a period in which, long before the Greeks, long before the Romans, long before Greek philosophy or the beginnings of modern science or anything like that. If we dare to try to get inside the minds of these Egyptians of Memphis, or these Canaanites of Shechem, or these Hurrians of Ugarit, we will find them beset by the same problems, hopes, fears, putative solutions we know 35 centuries later. The basic human aspirations remain personal freedom, self-fulfillment, health, gratification of the aesthetic sense. And mutatis mutandis, a citizen of the Middle East in the reign of Sharsatar, that's 1450 BC, or of Thutmose IV, 1426 BC, had as much chance of successfully realizing these aspirations as a tax-ridden city dweller in the democratic 20th century AD. There were labor strikes, and we have the dossier of the fact-finding committee set up to investigate them. There was inflation, and we have the price lists and the written complaints. There were taxes and tax evasion. We have the tax returns to prove it. People got married and divorced, changed jobs or were fired, bought and sold property and left detailed wills. People said, as we do, times aren't what they used to be, and the young don't respect their elders anymore. People also said, better live it up now because you can't take it with you. I wish I were dead. Better live it up. People went to parties and drank too much. When times got bad, some said, I wish I were dead. They read love poems and short stories, devotional works and horoscopes, books on how to win friends and influence people, and the occult. The farther back in time we glimpse our ancestors, the more like ourselves they become. And that last line is a little bit off the mark. What he is saying is that they've always been us. Even in societies that seem weird to us, they've always been us. And once you realize that basic fact of history, then reading history is not nearly as intimidating as it might be to people who don't usually read it. Then once you realize that basic fact, that you're dealing with people who didn't know they were part of history and who didn't know what was coming down the pike in terms of historical events or anything like that, who were just living day to day, once you realize that these are people, you can immediately identify with them, then the only X factor is the writing ability of the author. Same as anything else, same as any other genre. And that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. So that instead of you thinking that history is all boring, well, the reason it gets that PR is because so much of it is written poorly. Because so much of it is written by academics who don't have any incentive to write well. That doesn't mean it has to be that way. Not at all. Like, for instance, in Jason's Saturday Ramble, he mentioned Peter Ackroyd. I defy you to pick up a work of history written by Peter Ackroyd and be bored by it. He's just one example among many. Park Honen's another great example. Then we have the last book. I promise. This is the last book. And this thing is huge. This is an oversized coffee table book that I'm overjoyed to find. Just overjoyed. I've had this many, many times. The last time I had it was a long time ago. And it was summarily executed by a brawling crowd of beagles who tore it to pieces in front of me. And the damage had already been done when I first noticed, and then there was that impulse to jump down onto the floor and say, no, and pull everybody apart and say, no, you don't understand no. And then I realized the damage was already done, and they're having a blast, and it's just a book, and their happiness is more important. So I just sat there and watched while they ripped this book to shreds. They tore apart the boards and everything. That was the last copy that I had. I've had many copies. Now I have another one. I don't have any brawling beagles anymore. And weirdly enough, the weird realization is that I'm probably never going to have beagles again in my life. I have one little miniature schnauzer now, and she doesn't destroy things. Never has, even when she was a puppy. She's not interested in finding something and carrying it into another room and destroying it. She's not interested in chewing on furniture or peeing on furniture or grabbing things and eating, chewing through them or anything like that. All of those impulses in my little Frida are channeled towards murder. And they have been since she was old enough to have control over her muscles, since she was not a little puppy anymore, but getting a little bit older, a few months old. From then until now, the only thing that she likes to grab and tear apart are living mice. so she doesn't do that with anything else. So this book is not in any danger. She completely ignores my bookshelves. This is The World of Bats. See the clever design there? The title is also upside down. As a tip of the hat to the stereotypical thing that people think about bats, which is that they roost upside down, that all of them do. Actually, that's kind of rare. Most of them don't roost that way. Although you would roost that way yourself if you needed updraft in order to start flying. You put a little bat, a Microchiroptera, an example of a little bat. Put a little bat on a sward of grass or on a piece of concrete, and it won't be able to do much. They need you too would want to roost perched high up above the ground, so that you could just let go and gain a little updraft. But one way or another, I think that's a very clever design. That the part of the title is upside down, so that if you want to see the bat upside down, you can. And this is just lavishly, beautifully illustrated in black and white and color. Just photography. This was done in the 1960s, I believe, and it still holds up. It's still the best illustrated book on bats that there is. 1969. The photographs are by Nina Lehman. She gets the big credit on the cover. Did just a jobbing freelance photographer, went everywhere, wherever there was anything that could be photographed. Probably her claim to fame, aside from this book, would be Life magazine, the old Life magazine. I don't know if Life is still printed, but it's not the cultural institution that it once was. Once upon a time, it was a big deal, and she had dozens and dozens of covers for them. And it's entirely right that she get credit. Look at that. There's a vampire bat walking on two legs, as they often do. They have these odd walking styles as well, but they can walk on two legs for extended periods. It's good that she gets the lead here, because this is a photographic book, and this is the best work that she ever did. The text is by Alvin Novick. And it was probably at his insistence that his name is not bigger than hers on the cover here. He was a tireless bat researcher in many, many different locations, and a totally wonderful guy, dedicated to bats, but also loving of them. Most people who are terrified of bats have never met one. 99.9% of people who think bats are filthy, disease-ridden, flying rats have never met one. All it takes is for you to meet one to change that completely. Most bats, 99.9% of them, are completely harmless and want nothing to do with you. And he saw that, and he never missed an opportunity to teach people about that. And went everywhere, studying mainly echolocation in Microchiroptera, but he studied all sorts of other things too. He studied their natural history, their behavior patterns, their distribution, their ecology, whether or not they were under threat, that sort of thing. And he did that for years. That his research, his lab, his team of people were hard at work in 1969. But he changed all that about 10 years later, because the world encountered a catastrophe, and Alvin decided to be a hero. It's when you learn which heroes you have amongst you. That's how you learn where they are. That's how you learn who in your population is one, because when a catastrophe happens, they're the ones who will drop everything to deal with it. And he did. When the AIDS epidemic came along, he closed his lab, closed up his bat research, said to a couple of his friends, as hard as it is to believe, there are one or two things in the world more important than bats. And instead embarked on an incredible campaign of education and compassion about AIDS, about specifically doctors who were both treating AIDS patients and not wanting to be stigmatized for that, and also who had contracted AIDS and didn't want to be stigmatized for that either. Basically, his main goal in connection with AIDS, and because he was such a respected scientist, such a respected specialist, he had the ear of a lot of people in power who could make policy. So his goal was not fruitless. His main goal was to remove stigma completely. He would tell people over and over again, this is a virus. It doesn't have a stigma. There is no stigma attached with it. How about we save the righteousness for until we've got a grip on this thing? And in the meantime, let's make sure that we have a program for clean needle exchange. Let's make sure we have all sorts of disclosure and anonymity for people who are involved on the front lines and don't want the social stigma that does attach to this thing. Let's make sure that we're protecting as many people as we can in as many different ways and as many different levels of this catastrophe as we can. He threw himself into that because he was a hero. And to the limited extent that it worked for anyone to do that sort of thing, it certainly worked for him. So that, of course, was not known. I mean, when I first had this book, that was all in the future. That catastrophe and all the other catastrophes were in the future. We thought we were dealing with the worst of all possible worlds. We weren't. But we had no idea. And so it's extra touching to have this because of that. But the main reason I wanted it is because it's one of the best books on bats for a popular audience. It's not only eye-poppingly beautiful, but also incredibly informative throughout. So I was very, very happy to find it. It was in pretty rotten shape, but it'll never be in worse shape. I will never be destroyed again. So there you go. Sorry for the length of the video. That was an enormous Brattle haul. Can't do a Steve pyramid. There are too many books. I would fail right away. They're all stacked on the floor. But I'm gonna root through them and have a ball while the snow is flying fiercely tomorrow. So I will wrap this up for now at long last. Who knows how long it'll take to upload? Good Lord. But you get Jason or I chatting on books or anything else. So, but anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.